Do you have the MTHFR gene mutation and feel like it may be what's holding you back from healing? Or do you not know if you have the MTHFR gene SNP, but you kind of wonder if you have it and how much it might be impacting your healing and what the best testing would be for it? If you have any question as to how much the MTHFR gene may be impacting your healing, then you don't want to miss today's episode. On today's episode, I'm interviewing functional genomics expert Jaclyn Downs on all things MTHFR and gene mutations. I met Jacqueline recently in the Instagram comment section of my profile when she offered up some free help to someone asking a question about genes. I loved Jacqueline's response so much, and upon doing some quick stalking on her, fell even more in love with her knowledge and approach to genes. Naturally, I just had to have her onto the podcast to share her with you all. A bit about Jacqueline. Jacqueline has a master's degree in holistic nutrition, a functional Nutrigenomics certification from the NutriGenetic Research Institute, and is the author of the academically published book Enhancing Fertility Through Functional Medicine, Using Nutrigenomics to Solve Unexplained Fertility. On top of gaining her functional Nutrigenomics certification from the NutriGenetic Research Institute, Jacqueline actually helped to create the very same program by working as a researcher for Bob Miller, a top genetics researcher, to help create his practitioner certification program. Whether you're new to the conversation on how genes impact our health or you've been at it for a while, I hope my conversation today with Jacqueline is going to help you feel empowered and hopeful that no matter what genes you have, you can heal your body. Hey friend, welcome to the Better Belly podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormone, skin, sleep, and brain concerns. Literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Allison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. All right, guys, I'm so excited to introduce to you today my new friend, Jaclyn Downs. And when I say new friend, I mean we met on Instagram a week or two ago, was it last week? And instantly fell in love with all of her information. She is a functional genomics expert and researcher. And I immediately, when I went onto her profile and started looking at all her stuff, and when we were chatting in the comments of one of my Facebook or Instagram posts, I immediately knew that she is a cut above your average genomics expert. So I asked her to come on today and talk about the MTHFR gene mutation because I think this is something of big contention. I told Jacqueline, I got a lot of clients who will say that they feel like it's holding them back from healing, having this label or having this gene mutation they know they have. And so I asked her, could she come on and help us talk about MTHFR and, is it really what's keeping everybody from healing, basically? And if not, what else should we be looking at? So Jacqueline, thanks so much for coming on to the Better Belly podcast.
I am so excited to be here. I just totally resonate with all the information that you share. And I'm so happy that we are friends and actually talking in real life now.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. So, all right, I just want to start off with going straight into it. Question number one, Jacqueline, is the MTHFR gene really what's holding everyone back from healing? And by everyone, I mean all the people who have the gene mutation. Can we really give it that much power or blame?
So I almost titled my book MTHFR as a Gateway Gene because it is often the first gene that people hear about and learn about, and it introduces people to the concept that your health is influenced by your genes, but your genetic expression also influences the outcome of our health. And a lot of people blame everything wrong with their lives and their health on MTHFR because it's the only one they know. And I'm not discounting the importance of MTHFR, but that is an enormous amount of weight to place on one single gene and two SNPs, which we can talk about the difference, but Basically, you have all of your genes that you're born with that, as far as we know, they never change, but you can change the expression of your genes. And we have, there are millions of SNPs literally. And so having, just blaming everything on MTHFR, no, I don't think that that is going to give you the whole picture. In my book, I say that that is like thinking you know what an entire puzzle looks like based on one or two pieces. And so, like I said, I'm not discounting the importance of MTHFR because it does carry quite a load, but it does not work alone. No SNP works in isolation. Everything has factors upstream and downstream and back and front and diagonal of it to affect how it functions. But also, just because you have a genetic variant does not mean that it is expressing.
I love that. Can you actually, like, I've actually talked a little bit about this gene expression component because I came across it from Dr. Ben Lynch, who we're going to bring him up again later. But could you, for our listeners, explain what's the difference between having a gene and gene expression?
Right. So everyone says, oh, I have the BRCA gene, or oh, I have MTHFR. We all have those genes for the most part. There might be some people that have a deletion, which they don't have a certain copy. But if you didn't have MTHFR, you would not be alive. Like it would just be incompatible with life to not have that. So we all have these. It's just a matter of when somebody says they have it, and I'm using air quotes, it means that they have the quote unquote bad version of it. And so it, yeah, and we all do have it. And I'm sorry, what, I would just want to make
It
sure I
was
answer your question.
what's the difference between gene mutation? Like
Hmm.
I have the gene mutation
Okay.
and gene expression.
Oh, okay. So first off, let me correct it about gene mutation. A genetic mutation is actually a misnomer, and a lot of people, even really professional experts, uh, still call it a mutation. But technically, and I discussed this in my mini course, A Beginner's Guide to Nutrigenomics. A mutation technically is a genetic variant that occurs in less than 1% of the population. So it's really rare. Whereas a SNP or a genetic variant or a single nucleotide polymorphism occurs in a, a lot of people, more than 1%. Okay. And it can be up to 50, 60, 70% of people. Now, the expression of your genes is, a lot of people say it's like a light switch that you turn off or on. So you can have the gene, the blueprint for it to be a certain way, whether you quote unquote have it or you don't. But I think it's more of like a dimmer switch. So it's not either fully off or fully on. There are things that can affect and dial it up and dial it down. And so, like I said, just because you have the gene or the SNP doesn't mean that it's expressing, but it can be expressed to a certain degree, whether you have, depending on your stressors and your nutrient status and toxin exposure and all of that.
So correct me if I'm wrong. If someone's trying to think through what this can mean practically for them, is that maybe they have a gene, and let me make sure I say this right, a gene SNP,
Mm-hmm.
which they could like, lots of us could have. And maybe they go 20, 30, 40 years of their life and they feel like their health is fairly fine. But then suddenly things start going downhill and they learn of as they're trying to figure out what's going on, they learn they have an MTHFR gene SNP
Mm-hmm.
and they start blaming, well, it's all because of the gene SNP. And I would say,
Mm-hmm.
well, what about the rest of those 40 years? And what happened is that something happened that changed the expression of the gene, where the gene was expressing different. Is that what can happen, right? Where
Yes.
there's this period of time where maybe it's their whole life because the gene's always been switched into that expression where it's behaving less well,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not doing its job as optimally, right? But then it can get worse. It can start doing its job less and less well because
Yes.
of what's going on around the gene.
Yes, 100%. But it's not only that genetic variant, that SNP.
Yeah.
It is all of the other genes that also influence how it works. So it's kind of like a conveyor belt, where some genes, so genes make enzymes, right? And so the gene contains the blueprint for how that enzyme is made and performs. And so some genetic variants like MTHFR, if you have a genetic variant, it slows down that enzymatic activity, and other SNPs speed it up. So you could have genes upstream or downstream of MTHFR or any gene that could compensate for it. So you could have something that might degrade more slowly downstream. So the fact that MTHFR slows something down, but you have something else slowed down further downstream, that can kind of balance each other out, right? Like if you have a slow conveyor belt in one room and then you have a slow worker dealing with that, that's going to be the perfect fit. But then if you have something that's really fast upstream and then you have a slowed enzyme downstream, that's going to all back up and get clogged, right? So we can't just take MTHFR in isolation.
I love that. And that kind of gets to the second question I wanted to get to, which I'm sure we'll be answering this question sprinkled throughout the episode. But, what would be helpful to help, like, what is actually helpful for the MTHFR gene SNP to help make it work to the level it can work and / limit the burden on it and kind of overcome any limitation it might be placing onto someone's ability to heal?
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I'll say for our listeners, the first thing you just covered is look at all the other, help balance the conveyor belt speed or the kind of all the other genes, but go tell us everything you know.
So the good thing about functional genomics, these are genes you can actually do something about to support the functioning of. So I'm not like a geneticist that looks at your genetic predispositions for things like muscular dystrophy. Like that is a true genetic mutation and you can't really do anything to correct or compensate for that. But with MTHFR, you can improve your folate intake, or you can improve your methylation ability with supplements or folate-based foods. And so in the case of MTHFR, a lot of people just say, oh, well, I have MTHFR, I'm going to take a high dose of methylfolate. And in my book, I explain how that can backfire in a wildly horrible way for people because they might start taking methylfolate at a pretty high dose and they'll feel great for 2 weeks because they've started spinning some wheels and getting their detox going, but then they crash and burn. And that could be from just feeling like, you want to crawl out of your skin, or you just want to throw a plate across the kitchen, like just really anxious or really agitated because you got those wheels spinning too much too quickly before addressing other things. So for instance, we need B12 in order for folate to work. So if you start taking high doses of methylfolate, but you have low levels of B12, something called folate trapping is going to occur. So there's a lot of nuance to it, but basically, without knowing if you have a genetic variant, there's two things that you can do. One is to avoid folic acid, and we'll talk about that in a second. And the other would be to eat more folate-rich foods, like your leafy greens and your legumes, because those are going to help compensate for the slowed enzyme activity. And so you're going to need more folate. Now, here's something that your listeners this is a clinical pearl that I wish everybody knew. So all of these quote unquote experts say that MTHFR is what converts folic acid into methylfolate. So methylfolate is the bioavailable form of folate, which means it's the form that our body uses. And so folic acid is synthetic. It is not found anywhere in nature. It is made in a lab. Folic acid is named after folate, which is found in foliage. And so it is wrong to say that MTHFR converts folic acid into methylfolate. People forget about a really important gene that's right upstream of MTHFR, and it is called DHFR. And what that does is that is involved in converting methylfolate, that is involved in converting 2 of the 5 steps of converting folic acid into folate. And then MTHFR adds the methyl group to that folate and turns it into methylfolate so our body can use it. So it's a 2-step process. So I use the analogy, if you asked me for an envelope, 50% of the population would be able to handle, if I gave you paper, scissors, and glue, you would be able to make your own envelope. And the envelope is the end product. That's the methylfolate. It's ready for you to use and deliver to the cells. But some people, roughly half of the population, aren't really good at assembling and making that. So when you have DHFR, that's going to mean that you don't have the tape. or the tape doesn't work, it's not sticky or something like that. So basically, MTHFR does not convert folic acid into methylfolate. It adds a folate group or a methyl group to the folate. So I just went off on a little tangent there, but it drives me crazy because anybody that says, and there still are some genetic testing companies that are saying that, and
They're
somebody just
simplifying it in an unhelpful way.
yes, because they're making it all about MTHFR and they're forgetting that DHFR plays a huge part. And then there's also folate receptors. You could have no variance in MTHFR and no variance in DHFR, but if your FOLR genes, which are your folate receptors, that's like the little keyholes for the folate to be able to enter the cell. And so if you have variance there, your folate receptors aren't going to be very responsive and the folate's not going to be able to get into the cell. And it's going to sort of have the same effect as having an MTHFR variant or a DHFR variant. So they all work together. They all lean on each other and they all work in concert with each other.
So what I love what you're bringing into hopefully people's awareness as they're listening to you, and you're doing it in a beautifully detailed way, is introducing us to new concepts we haven't heard, where it's not even all about, is it methylated? Is it unmethylated? Like there's other things to consider. Like, and for you specialize in the genes. You really know about the genes. Something you haven't mentioned that I know you know about is also cofactors.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a bit about I'm actually interested. Could you just, in your own words, I just very specifically want you to talk about how cofactors, you could have a perfectly normal MTHFR gene. And if you're missing cofactors or if other things are going wrong, what are the other things that could make a normal gene look like it's an MTHFR gene SNP?
This is such a great question. I'm so excited that you asked that. So, cofactors, hooray for cofactors, first off, but also they're the reason why nutrition matters. They are the reason why nutrition is information for your genes. Because every single gene that makes that enzyme, so right, the MTHFR gene makes the MTHFR enzyme, but these enzymes require nutritional cofactors to work. And in my book, I say that that's like certain engines require specific fuels. So you need to have the right fuel for that engine to work. And so a lot of nutritional cofactors, they are your minerals. Like magnesium is a cofactor for so many enzymatic reactions. Zinc is also. And your B vitamins, they're so important. And the reason why we're so deficient in them is because stress depletes them, but also we burn through them because we need them for these processes. And when we're exposed to toxins and we have stress, then we require more to help compensate for that. And so nutritional cofactors can be, like I said, they can be vitamins and minerals, but they can also be plant phytonutrients, and they can be certain amino acids. And so if you, let's just say that you have a mineral deficiency in a certain mineral that's a cofactor for that enzyme, whether or not you have a genetic variant, it is going to behave like you do. Or there's certain toxins that inhibit the enzymatic activity. So you could have no genetic variant, but if you have exposure to, I don't know, organophosphates or benzene or something, that is going to throw a wrench in that enzymatic reaction. And so it will act as if you had that genetic variant, even though you don't. But if you have the genetic variant and you throw that toxin on there and you have the nutritional deficiency, then you're really screwed. Like that's when people they're really having some problems. And the pendulum has swung so far off that you have to really do some intensive protocols to bring that pendulum back.
Yes. And that's where my clients tend to be, where they might come in and they sometimes say, well, I really think this gene's messing me up. I'm like, yeah, you might really have this gene mutation. Like and sorry, I keep saying it wrong because I did not know you should not say gene mutation.
Right.
Gene SNP. They have the gene SNP. And they really think it's messing with them. And yes, it might be adding to the layers of what's going on. But I say, but you also have mercury, and that can throw off this gene. You also have, arsenic. You also have mold toxicity. You also have, a zinc deficiency, which is very common in our clients.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I actually love by the way, I love like examples you give of this like envelope, it makes me think in one case you have someone who just can't make the envelope very well. And if you take away the paper or the scissors or the tape, they'll really struggle. But you can have someone who makes envelopes just fine, and you say, please make an envelope for me. And they're like, but you didn't give me enough paper. Like, if you
Mm-hmm.
say, make me 50 envelopes, you're like, but you only gave me 25 pieces of paper. Like, I can't make all
Mm-hmm.
the envelopes you need.
Right.
And so that's where you can even have symptoms of somebody who has that gene SNP without even having it.
Yeah. Or you could go further upstream and that person might not have the energy to make that because they have some mitochondrial dysfunction. So that's going way further upstream. So then we got to address the genes involved with your mitochondria, but also what is burdening that's causing that mitochondrial dysfunction.
All right. I have two questions coming out of this, and I did write them down, so I'll remember them no matter what. Number one is I've been curious and wanting to ask a genomics expert about vitamin B dosing because I've been wondering, is this kind of you just have to figure it out per person, like test like a just test and see like is this the right amount of vitamin B6 and methylfolate or unmethylated folate like or is there any way to test? I've just been wondering, like, is there a way you could just look at somebody and be like, well, with your weight and this type of gene SNP and stuff, here's how much you can take so you don't overdo it, and here's how much you can take to underdo it? Or is it really that person has to figure it out? Like, I know that if they're on vacation versus on Dr. Ben Lynch talks about if he's on vacation versus if he's in a work week, he takes different types of vitamins because his body has different needs. What has been your experience or your familiarity with vitamin B dosing?
What you said is correct, but also the opposite can be correct as well. So there are, let's just take B6 for instance. Okay, there are probably, in my, just off the top of my head, there's probably at least 8 to 12 different genes, and then each gene can have hundreds of SNPs in its own that relate to vitamin B6 production, conversion, utilization, metabolism. So we can't just focus on one or two genes for that. So that's where testing comes into play, and knowing your genetics to find out where I like to say, like, where in the haystack to look. So, to provide the framework for what might be going on and where in that B6 pathway you might need support. But doing blood testing and organic acids testing together is really, really great because, and this is really, really common with B12, is that, well, my doctor said my B12 levels look fine or even high in my blood because doctors are really only measuring serum B12. But a urine organic acids test looks at your urine. So your urine is like your car's exhaust. It tells you what has gotten into the cell and has been used and is now metabolized and the body's now getting rid of it. Whereas the serum is only showing you what's in the blood. It's not telling you how much your body's able to use. And so if you're eating meat or you're supplementing with B12, yeah, your B12 levels are going to look fine in the blood. But if you have some kind of B12 transport issues or absorption issues or other issues with your methylation, then that B12 might not be getting to where it needs to go or doing what it needs to do. And so your cells are going to be deficient, even though your blood levels look good. So it is good to cross-reference with multiple tests. But also, there's so many factors that are moving pieces that I usually recommend people start with a certain form and then start slow and low and titrate up. Because a lot of the problems are just when people just go right to supplementing a high dose every day without, and then, like I said, they could be fine for 2 weeks, but then they crash and burn. Or they start taking all these new supplements at one time. So I recommend people layer them in, give it, 5 to 7 days to make sure that one's okay. Like, say you start on a new protocol that has 5 supplements, you don't want to start all of them the same day because you're
Right.
not going to be sure what is doing what. So without really knowing, my recommendation is to start slow and low and start with a pretty benign form. So like for people regarding MTHFR, a lot of people with MTHFR, even though they need methylfolate, it is too much. It's just like rocket fuel for them. And so I would recommend starting out with more leafy greens. I would recommend a folinic acid, not folic acid, folinic acid, because that is going to help the process without actually being the end result of the methylfolate, because that, again, that's too much too quick. So, and same thing with B12. A lot of people just go right for the methylcobalamin. So B12, vitamin B12 is cobalamin, and there's four main types. There's cyanocobalamin, which is very inexpensive and it's very shelf stable, and that's why a lot of the supplements of questionable quality use cyanocobalamin. And then there's hydroxycobalamin, which is great for overmethylators or people that aren't quite sure that they tolerate methyl groups. And then the adenosylcobalamin is my favorite. It's kind of the unsung hero of the B12 because that one is specific for supporting the mitochondria. And then there's your methylcobalamin, which helps to drive the methylation pathway, but like I said, can be a bit too much if people are sensitive to methyl groups, whether they need them or not.
Is there a form of B6 you recommend?
I like P5P, which is pyridoxal 5 phosphate, which is the bioactive form. So
Yeah.
again, it doesn't need conversion like I said, like folic acid does. So P5P is the bioavailable form.
Yeah, because thus far in my practice, we haven't done super deep diving, and I haven't really needed to, with like trying to hone in on exactly how many B vitamins people need. But I will get clients who just hyper react to them, and I'm like, is there a smarter way to do this? Like, is there a way I could just know how much they need, or are we just kind of? My approach typically has been slow and low with gentle forms. And just see like how they react. But I've always been like, I'm a precise person. We do a
Mm-hmm.
lot of data and in my work, and that helps us get good results fast and kind of see the big picture. But I've always been like, I would love it if I could just be like, take this many milligrams. But
Right, right,
I
yeah.
mean, your response really says that there's both. There is, even if you know what's going on and that can give you some more precise guidance, you still have to like at the end of the day be like, did I react well to that supplement or not? And like really be aware of what you're taking and not take multiple things at once because then or at least change multiple things at once
Mm-hmm.
when you're changing your supplements because then you really don't know what's going on.
Yes, but also you can replete a deficiency and maybe you don't need that dose after 3 to 6 months or a year. So it's not like you need to be on this same supplement protocol for the rest of your life because our bodies are very dynamic and they're changing and there's a lot of robbing Peter to pay Paul, so if there's a deficiency somewhere, then your body is going to send resources to that and then it can kind of end up depleting the other original, and then so like it's kind of like this pendulum that goes back and forth.
Something that some of our listeners might not be familiar with is that there's genetic testing where we're like looking at DNA, but then there's also testing and being able. You've already brought it up a little bit. I don't think they were aware of it, but what I call like complementary testing, where we're looking at okay, well this gene impacts folate or methylfolate or B12 or whatever, but this is the actual testing that shows exactly how much B12 is in your body in what specific form. Or do you typically, when you're working with clients, do both like the testing and like the homocysteine levels or the SAMe or the SAH? Like, do you do both at the same time, or do you find that you're able to get most of what you need done with just the DNA testing?
The genetics only show you your predisposition. They will never provide you with a diagnosis. The functional genomics
Yeah.
will only, yeah, right. It's not like, do you have muscular dystrophy or not, right? Like that's different. So no, the functional genomics that I look at are not diagnostic, but they provide a very clear framework as to what could be going on. And that's why it's really nice to pair with functional lab testing or even conventional lab testing. Now, a lot of times things are cost prohibitive. So, of course, I'm never going to say no to testing. I would love to have the most points of data to help me make an informed decision and understanding of what's going on. But if it's cost prohibitive for some people, then I work with what I have and I say, okay, well, this would be the most important thing to find out. Or if you can only get, your serum B12 and maybe your doctor will be cool and like add homocysteine onto that panel so your insurance can cover it, then that'll give us a better idea. But then, of course, there's labs like Doctors Data and Genova that run a whole methylation pathway panel. So you can see exactly where your levels are in every point of the methylation pathway. And you compare that with your genetic variants. And you can say, okay, is this high or low because of this genetic variant? And it's something that I'm going to need to support indefinitely? Or is this high or low and there's no genetic variant? And so it's because of some toxic exposure or nutrient deficiency. And we can just kind of bring the pendulum back to the middle and then just keep an eye on it or revisit it every now and then to make sure it's still good.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's what I've been trained. That's what I've been taught is to do both because the genetic variance doesn't even tell you like if there's a need. Maybe they have the variance, but there's no need there. It's actually functioning very well for that person's body and the issue somewhere else. But um, that's good that I'm not crazy. And also for our listeners that if they've never heard that you kind of want both the predisposition, but also what's actually going on in the body, which actually I was curious if you had your like ideal test, like all the information I could want on a client, like do you have a test or two that these would be your go-to test to get that max data?
My most frequently run test is a bundle that includes um, four tests in one urine sample. And it includes a urine organic acids test, which is like by itself is worth its weight in gold. There's so many good markers on that test alone. And I talk about that a lot in my book. It includes a mycotoxin test because almost every single person that has run a mycotoxin test with me has come back with some degree of mold, whether it's from a house they grew up in or a dorm they lived in 10 years ago or a current office that they're working in, something, right? So mycotoxins, like that's usually one of the first things I address because we can't cross the threshold into vitality and healing if we're still dealing with mold. So you can
Amen.
recommend, mitochondrial supplements and B vitamins, but you're only plugging up the holes for so long. Other holes are going to form. Okay, so that's the second test. The third test is a heavy metals test, and the fourth test is an environmental toxins test. And all of those in one urine sample just really provide a great foundation, a 30-foot view of like what could be going on. And it is really, really great to pair with your genes. So for instance, the urine organic acids test has 8 markers for how well you're using your fats and how well your bile is likely flowing. And I could talk about bile all day long. It's such a cool substance. It's so important and people just forget about it all the time. They all just focus on the liver, right? Liver and the gut. But the bile is what takes the toxins from the liver and exports them into the gut. And so if you have issues like SIBO or if you have gallbladder issues, that's a problem. And then you can see in your genetics, for instance, the PEMT gene, which is one of the genes in my big 3 that's in my freebie, then that is going to impact your bile flow. And so we can pair the real-time snapshot of what's happening metabolically in your body with, is it genetically predisposed or is it not? And is it just something that we need to deal with? And then you can get over it, quote unquote, get over it.
Do you have a gene test you like? I hear people talk about all different ones, and I haven't found one that I'm like, this is like my killer good one. I have one I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, it's reasonable, but like, I don't know. Is there one that you really like?
Well, I personally use the functional genomic analysis that my colleague Bob Miller, and I actually helped to put the research into that. But the reason why I like it, whether or not I am affiliated with it or not, is because all of the other genetic test companies that I have seen through sample reports or that clients have come to me with saying, well, can you help me make sense of this? And it's telling me to take this supplement, but then 10 pages later, it's telling me to stay away from the supplement and I don't know what to do.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
the reason is, like I said, the more points of data you have, the better you can know what to do. And so there's something called clinically validated and non-clinically validated SNPs. So clinically validated there's actually a ClinVar database. I think it's actually just clinvar.com for clinical variants. And these are the SNPs that have the clinical research behind them. So we know how they impact the body. We know how impactful they are if you have them. But that sometimes for a gene, they might only have 2 SNPs, maybe 4 SNPs, sometimes more, right? Sometimes it doesn't. But there can be dozens, if not hundreds, of non-clinically validated SNPs for that single gene. And so it's like that iceberg model where you're only seeing what's above the water. So there might only be 2 SNPs, and your person that's running your test or the AI generator or whatever it is going to say, "Oh, you're fine. You don't have any variance there." But they're only looking at 2 SNPs when there could be 200. And so you could be really, really variated in all of those non-clinically validated SNPs. So just because they don't have the research doesn't mean they're not impactful. We don't know how impactful they are, but if you have a whole bunch, especially that, and I like to use like a scale analogy. So I'm holding my hands up here, kind of like, you know, when you look at the logo for a law office, there's that scale. And so having a SNP will place a marble on the side of the scale for it maybe to have like a decrease in efficiency. So we don't know how big or heavy those marbles would be that are not clinically validated, but we know that they're going to be placed on that side of the scale, affecting it to some degree, tipping the balance.
I love it. That's super, super helpful. And you actually, well, that was one of, before I even asked you on the podcast, I was like, hey, do you have any recommendations on where to learn this stuff as a practitioner? Because I haven't put my money down on one yet, partly because I'm like, is this a good program? I've been in health long enough to know that somebody can be selling something. They could be selling a supplement. They can be selling a book. They could be selling a program. They could be selling just like to work with them. And that doesn't mean that they actually like have the good information that they're working with. And that's why I was so excited to have you on the podcast because my goal of the Better Belly podcast is we only have really highly qualified individuals, and they're not always the individuals that you hear about the most or have the biggest company or have the whatever shiniest thing. There can be like what I call diamonds in the roughs that they are really solid information, but it's really hard to be solid information and like the most business savvy person with the biggest following and the whatever, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I hope that for our listeners that they always know that when they come on, they're going to hear people who've really been vetted out. I could tell you did good. And I was like, so where do I learn? And you said Bob
Yeah.
Miller. So I'm
Yeah.
going to,
So his test is not a direct to consumer. It's for practitioners only because
yeah.
there's
Yep.
so much information,
Yes.
and also because a lot of people, if they get that information, especially people with a lot of glutamate or that have a lot of long-term issues, they're going to want to go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and then the more you learn, the more confused you get. But I did want to say, yes, I completely agree with you that there are, because genetics is so new and rapidly growing, there's so many companies out there jumping on the bandwagon. They might have learned about MTHFR last year, it rocked their world, and then they create this test, and then they're only testing for MTHFR or even like a couple dozen genes. There's so many companies out there that just like, okay, we're going to list out this number of genes. We'll just say, it could be anywhere from 25 to, I don't know, like 200. And do you have it or do you not? And then they slap on this automated canned response. You have a homozygous variant for this, so this is the information we're going to populate it with. And that is not taking you as an individual into consideration. So my service is not designed for high volume. I will never be able to run 1,000 tests a day ever, and nor do I want to, because that's not providing the quality of service that I want. You can think of me like your genetic concierge, because I do an in-depth, meticulously in-depth intake form where I'm asking about poop and your sleep and your exposures and your periods and your dental history and skin health and all of that. And as I review your genes, I am emailing you saying, hey, I'm seeing a predisposition for this. Can you tell me, does this run in your family? Do you have any history with this? And so they take me hours, and they're ultra personalized. And so I don't really recommend a lot of the people, especially that are the well-known influencers. And there's one that just drives me crazy because his test was $600 and it only looked at 5 genes in the methylation pathway. And people think that methylation pathway is like the only pathway in the body that you need to know about. But so your methylation, it is very important. Again, I'm not discounting the importance of methylation because it's super important. But people say, oh, well, I can't detox because I have MTHFR. We have CYP genes, like dozens of them in our phase 1 liver detox pathway. But then we have 6 phase 2 liver detox pathways with dozens of genes in each of those. And methylation is only one of those 6. We have your glutathione conjugation. And in my book, I call glucuronidation the unsung hero, because people always talk about glutathione and they always talk about methylation, but they don't even know about glucuronidation. So I talk about that in my book. Can nerd out on it.
I bought your book. I bought it as soon as she posted in my Instagram comments like, My book covers this. I was like, bought.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I
Bought.
feel like, you asked for a recommendation and I hesitated. I didn't get back to you for a few days because like I didn't want to sound salesy, but now let's, my book is it addresses a lot of
It's
things. So
amazing.
it's
Yeah.
common but lesser known causes of oxidative stress that are at the root of so many chronic and puzzling conditions. And it names genes around iron dysregulation, around oxalates, around histamine, around fatty acid utilization. So it's not just MTHFR or methylation.
Yeah.
Now, you had asked me, I think maybe this is one of your next questions about what I feel about Ben Lynch and his book, Dirty Genes.
It was the last question I was going to
Okay.
ask you because after that, I really want you to be able to tell all our listeners ways to connect with you because I think I've found out all your like your freebie, your book, and how people can get their genes looked at by you, and it's amazing. And so I want everybody to know, and we're gonna have all the links here. But yeah, my one of my questions, and if we have any listeners who follow, and some of our listeners hear like all our podcast episodes, they know that I've released a couple episodes on gene SNPs, and clearly I think I said gene mutation in the whole of them. So noob over here, I don't know, but a lot of it was based on Dr. Ben Lynch, and I
Mhm.
love his work. And one of my
Mhm.
first questions to you was, look, is he legit? Like, does he missing the mark? Because he's my favorite functional genomics guy. I think what he says makes sense, and it seems to address things that other people are not. And tell us, like, what do you know about him? Is he good? Can people follow him?
Yeah, he's the OG, and I do think he is a great resource. And I think his supplements are pretty decent as well.
I love Seeking Health, a lot
Yeah,
of them.
yeah, I personally take some of those,
Yes.
especially like the methyl free ones. I like that he just explicitly has an entire, specifically for methyl free for people that can't handle methyl groups. So his book and his information, I think, are more for um, an introduction to people on how their diet and deficiencies and their exposures and their stressors impact their health. So a lot of it is what I call like low hanging fruit. So it's, telling people to clean up their lifestyle and clean up their house cleaning products and their body care products and buy organic and eat more vegetables. And so they're just things that are going to benefit everybody, no matter what your genetic blueprint is. And I have a chapter in my book similar to that on like, it doesn't matter what your genetics are, these are the things that are good for all human beings. Because there have been people that have brought me genetic tests and so I'm like, okay, well, what were your biggest takeaways from this test? And they're like, well, I should exercise regularly and I should eat more vegetables and get more antioxidants. And I'm like, you did not need to pay hundreds of dollars for a genetic test to tell you that. That is something that benefits everybody. And so Ben's a bit, or Dr. Lynch, I guess I should say, is definitely, he knows his stuff. He is an expert and he can definitely work with really, really um, puzzling,
Complex. Yeah.
yeah, complex clients. But he also, I like the way that he presents it, especially when you have a book. It's very foundational, right? If you want to work with him or other practitioners, then that's something that you can seek yourself. So yeah, I do think his information is pretty good. There is one thing that I actually ended up messaging him back when I was a research assistant for Bob Miller um, about. He calls it the DAO gene.
Yeah. DAO. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is wrong. And actually back then he knew it too, but I don't know if he just forgot. But the DAO gene is because so most genes like MTHFR are named for the enzyme that they
Exactly. Diamine oxidase for people, it helps break down histamine in the gut.
make.
So
Yeah.
diamine oxidase is a real enzyme, and she's saying that most genes are named for the enzyme they create.
Yes. But there is an actual DAO gene, but it makes D amino acid oxidase, which is involved with your neurotransmitters
Hmm.
and serine. And so the ABP1, also known as the AOC1 gene, is what makes diamine oxidase, which degrades histamine.
All
So
right.
that's the only thing that I am like vehemently disagree with him about.
But it almost seems like a typo more than anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly
So when people say DAO gene, like not that many people know about the D amino acid oxidase
to
gene. So
begin
I
with.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, we could riff on histamine because I know you nerd out about it as much as I do. So yeah, DAO helps to degrade the histamine level in your body, whereas over-the-counter antihistamines just close the receptor so the histamine can't get in. So it's not actually lowering histamine levels in the
Yeah.
body. There's also another gene, your HNMT, which requires methylation in order to degrade histamine.
Yes, and the rest of the body. HNMT. It's a great gene.
Yeah.
So, well, Jacqueline, it's been great having you on. We are going to definitely get a link to your book in the podcast show notes, just so people know it does have like fertility in there. But I started reading it. It's going to be applicable to everything. I mean, if you are struggling with fertility issues, it's going to be thebomb.com. But even if you're not, if you're interested in genes and how they work and how you could optimize yours, I hands down, or I've already started looking through it and would recommend it. But how else can Jacqueline, how else can people work with you, follow you, learn more about the work that you've done?
You can go to my website, jaclyndowns.com, JACLYNDOWNS, or you can follow me on Instagram. I'm trying to be more active there. And my handle is at Functional Genomics.
Wonderful. And we're going to also include a link to just work with you, your options for interpreting some genetic testing for people. And something that you actually have on your website, I don't know if it's going to be on that page where they could book, but you're very open about working with other practitioners. And you told me that you will send practitioners your findings to that practitioner, right?
So I have an affiliate program that practitioners can sign up for, because a lot of practitioners want to learn more about genetics. They just don't have the time to learn a whole other modality, right? It's like drinking from a fire hydrant. So you can share your link and your client or patient will get their genetic interpretation. They will get a typed document that's ultra personalized, and they will get a video of me going through that, showing them their genes in the software. And then they, because of HIPAA, I can't personally share it with the practitioner, but they can share the typed document and they can share the video with their practitioner. And I recommend, certain tests to run. I recommend certain specific supplements or forms of supplements. And so that can really help to have that practitioner be a better assistance to you.
Hands down. I mean, I love that you do that because I find that people do end up getting different practitioners, like a pelvic floor therapist or whatever. And I like to talk to my clients about those other practitioners, but sometimes in functional medicine, it can be hard to overlap. I think sometimes it shouldn't happen because it's like if they're doing the same thing as me and then we're saying two different things,
Mm-hmm.
it can be confusing. But you're not really doing the same thing. You're doing functional genomics, and I'm doing other types of testing. And so I just love that you have that option for people to be able to easily share your findings with their practitioner to make it all work together. And I just think it's so beautiful. So just from my heart, thank you for keeping that as a consideration as you made choices about how you help people heal. So, anyways, we're going to have links for you guys to work with Jacqueline, to read her book. She even has a little free document called The Big Three Most Impactful Genes. I downloaded it. I can tell you that I've read two of the three and I had never heard of them before. At least I hadn't had anyone say, yeah, these ones matter that much. And the way you describe it, Jacqueline, I was like, these do matter. Why is no one talking about them? So I know we didn't talk about them today because I wanted to be really deep on the MTHFR, but I think it'll expand our conversation for people because you talking about other genes we need to be aware of. So highly recommend downloading her Big Three Most Impactful Genes, which we'll have in the show notes. And Jacqueline, thank you so, so, so much for coming onto the Better Belly podcast.
Thank you so much. It was great.